A small group. Hopefully, we'll have a few more that will show up. I'm very pleased to have Steve Schill from the Department of Geography here today. He won the college Hickman faculty, the adjunct faculty teaching award. It was actually fall of 2020 that was awarded to him, and he's been teaching for our department 10 years, and he teaches a couple different classes. Is that right? And he works full-time for Nature's Conservancy. Is that right? And then he has fun with us, with our students, and he does a lot of really innovative things with the students, and gets involved in projects that are beneficial for them in their educational experience. And so, just want to turn the time over to Steve and just go ahead and get started. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, well, thanks for the opportunity to talk. Yeah, it's been 10 years since I've been in a lot of classes, and I want to talk about kind of the evolution of how I've taught classes. And the class I really enjoy is this Geography 415, which is all about extracting information from imagery, from remotely sensed imagery. And when I started teaching this class, I would let the students choose their own. There's a final project that they do, and so I let them choose what they want to do. They have to give me a research question, and then I approve it, and then they go ahead and execute the project over the semester. And at the end of the semester, they present the results. And it was going well, but I thought there's a better way we can do this, And I work with the Nature Conservancy. This is 19 years I've been with the Nature Conservancy, and I work on really complex marine-related conservation problems. And I also have a network of a lot of conservation professionals around the world. And I thought, conservation in general is, they have limited resources. We really need to be strategic in how we use those resources. And I thought, I need to reach out to these organizations and find out if there's some work that my students can do to help answer a conservation-related question. So in 2017 was the first year that I experimented with this. And before the semester began, I contacted the contacts that I've been working with in African Parks. And African Parks is a nonprofit that works across Africa. And their goal is to have 30 national parks in Africa under management by 2030. And they have a really innovative model where they go in and they take over the management from the government. And currently they're at 19 parks, and they work in about eight different countries. And so I asked them, I said, do you need land cover maps for your parks? Which they replied, absolutely. A lot of the parks don't even have land cover. He said, well, I've got students that want to save rhinos, they want to save elephants. Let's work together to create products for you that can help you with your management. And so I lined up these products, I lined up the parks that needed it. And on the first day, I divided the class into teams of 2. And I said, pick your park. We're gonna map these parks, and you're gonna be working with the park, one of the park directors, and those in charge of making decisions. And we're gonna create a product that's gonna live on beyond this class. Many of you in the past, the students in the past have been doing projects that they basically end when the semester's over, and they don't have any life after that. So let's do something. And it was a great experience, and it really opened my eyes. And yeah, it's a little more involvement on my side to do this, but the students really became engaged. And this is like on the last day of class when we presented all our projects. They sent us hats. Everyone got a hat, and it was a real great experience. But so this is what, let's see here, how it turned on. These are what some of the projects, the products look like, where we had the people in the field in Africa send us GPS locations of different habitat types they were interested in. And then we actually created the land cover products. And these are being used by African parks as a baseline to monitor change into the future. This year, we've partnered, so we've been doing this since 2017, but this year we're partnering with an organization called Rewilding Europe. And we're working in these regions with teams of 2. The students are divided into teams of 2. And there's some really interesting research questions. You know, they're like in the central Apennines, they're looking at how old orchards are now converting back into natural woodlands. In the Danube Delta and the Oder Delta on the German-Poland border, they're looking at how taking out dams have changed the hydrology. And in all of these projects, the students are doing a change detection. So they're taking satellite imagery that was taken in the last 2 years, and then they're taking satellite imagery from like 1984, 1985, and they're looking at changes. It's specifically answering a research question. And you know, we have these Zoom calls every 2 weeks with the students. They're no more than 30 minutes long. And we check in. This is an area in Croatia that we're working at. Keegan, he's a master's student at PWS. But Nino and Rohan, they're Croatians that work in this area, and they're providing information. And Keegan is using this information, and Nate, his partner, is using this information to create land cover maps that are helping answer the question. Here's another, this is Joshua, who works up in the Oder Delta. And we're looking at hydrology and wetland changes that have gone on there. And then this is an area in Scotland where we're looking at how reforestation efforts are changing the landscape in the African Highlands in Scotland. And I just really enjoy doing these projects, but there's a lot of terms that have been presented in this type of approach. Getting students to act and to really get involved in real world applications. But essentially it comes down to learning by doing, giving them hands-on experience, solving real world problems, taking on these relevant projects that are answering real world questions and applying their skills to help them deliver a product that answers a question, and they can experience the impact that they're having in answering that question. And we know that learning is not passive, and we need to be asking ourselves, what will my students do to learn for themselves? It's all about doing. It's not about, what can I teach? It's what can I do to help my what can my students do to help them learn? What can they discover by themselves? And how can I inspire them to act? I've kind of seen this process as I've tried to implement this. David L. Bednar, I listened to a podcast recently that he was talking a lot about this, about this parable of if you give a man a fish, it feeds him for one day, but teach him, then it feeds him for a lifetime. So he says we're not in the business of distributing fish, rather our work is to help those we teach learn to fish, spiritually steadfast. And I think it's really a powerful way to have the students learn is if we can encourage them, give them the incentive, and give them the motivation to take on a real world project and to be involved with it and to be conversing with experts in the field. And they really respond and have been excited about doing this. This has been a great learning experience for me in the way I teach and making those real world connections. So they're more engaged. When we bring in outside experts, we can find out what those questions are. And then we can try to help the students apply their learning to these real world problems. It's really going to prepare them for life outside the classroom. And our intention is to make those connections where we can motivate, spark their interest, and can convey the significance of what we're doing. So some of the core elements that I've thought of is, identifying that question, and that's suitable within the time that the students have. We have to really sometimes rein it in because it can be, the outside experts want them to do a lot. So we have to temper expectations. But what I really like is to have it really open-ended and ill-defined, so the students can really think about how they're going to tackle this problem. How do you detect changes in hydrology using the data and software that we have and the methods that we have? I kind of let them figure out how to go about doing that. What's the best remote sensing data? What's the best technique to really resolve that? And having them on student teams, I think, has been really helpful because they work together, which is what we're doing. We're trying to prepare them for the real world, and letting them choose the projects that they want to do based on the research questions that I've identified. Sometimes I'll have 10 or 13 projects that people have sent me saying, we need help doing this. And I present those to the students and I let the students decide. You know, and I know President Worthland has been saying he's really encouraging inspirational learning. You know, it's our institutional DNA that we're really trying to, we have these students for a short time and we're trying to prepare them to tackle real world problems. And this has, I think, been helpful for a lot of the students that have gone through this process. So the way I do it is it's project-based learning. We identify the projects before the semester begins. Then I assign the teams, and then I let them choose based on their interest. And then we have to set up these regular meetings that are short, that are just check-ins to make sure that we're moving towards the end goal of answering this research question. We're getting the data that we need. And sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes some of the collaborators are more responsive than others. And so it sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. But for the most part, we can give them encouragement that they give us what we need so the students can continue to progress. And then they give a final presentation in a report. So here's some of the examples of past years. We did 7 islands across the Caribbean. Many of these islands had land cover data sets that were more than 20 years old. And so we helped them update the land cover. You know, a lot of the students, you know, if they could, they would love to go and collect their own data in the field. But we have to rely on those partners to do that. Here's a project we did in Mongolia with the Nature Conservancy, looking at differences in management regimes and the effect that was having on the pasture based on intensity of grazing and, you know, altering herds. And we helped them identify what management regimens were better for grazing. We did another one in the Channel Islands where we looked at differences from when they removed goats and pigs from the Channel Islands. This is managed by the Nature Conservancy. And we looked at how that was changing growth rates of vegetation and also sedimentation that was going into the ocean.
So those are wild goats and pigs?
Yeah, these are all feral goats and pigs that were having a big impact on the vegetative cover and, you know, causing problems with erosion. So they were all removed. And then we looked at, there's another project in Southern Nevada where we looked at, we wanted to track how restoration efforts in wetland environments, what impact that was having from the way it was 20 years ago. And we were able to really do a good job of mapping those wetlands and answering that question. And then this was a really cool project where in Mongolia, where they mapped, Grace worked on this, and her partner, but they mapped the suitability of snow leopard habitat, and they were able to use information from camera traps, GPS collars. And the research question was, where are the high conflict zones between snow leopards and herders, where these camps are based, where they move their sheep, because sometimes there's sheep fatalities from snow leopards. And so they wanted to model those, because this was kind of a remote sensing GIS, you know, raster-based modeling approach, which helped them answer that question and understand the patterns that they were seeing. And so to bring it all together, this is from the Office of Experiential Learning on the BYU site. And this is the cycle of inspiring learning. So they break it into 3 sections. There's intention, integration, and reflection. Where intention is where you're really thinking about the purpose, the specific outcomes, and the process for achieving your learning objectives. And then integration is all about application of knowledge and being able to evaluate those intentions against what is being learned. And then finally, you think about what you've learned, identify these principles and how it was learned, and then hopefully you can improve upon it. And this is all centered around trying to inspire these students in their learning experience. So ways we can apply this in the classroom, we can think about case-based. I think I'm mainly focused on project-based, but here's some ideas. We can think about case-based learning where we have them tackle real-world problems and they put themselves in the position of the people that are the original participants, and they think about the complexities and the uncertainties trying to solve that. Or we can give them direct problems and they can try to discover for themselves, internalize what they're learning. And or finally project-based learning, where I really try to make it student guided. They're trying to tackle this question and think about what's the best way to approach it, to apply their skills and have a product that's going to live beyond the classroom and benefit, conservation, which is what I really care about. And I just want to focus on a few students. Teresa Gomez, I first met her 2011, and she was in my class. And I noticed that she had really good GIS skills, and so I hired her to help with some of the TNC projects. She graduated, she went on a mission to Italy, and she came back and she contacted me and said, I really want to do a master's program. And I said, yeah, that's great. Let me see if I can find you some funding. And we were actually able to get funding to do a project in Cuba that paid for her master's. And here she is in Cuba. We took several trips there, and she actually carried out mini workshops there. Her thesis was all about identifying the protection benefits of coastal habitats to vulnerable coastal communities. So looking at mangroves and coral reefs, and how mangroves and coral reefs act as natural infrastructure that buffer and protect people. And many of these coral reefs are eroding, they're dying. Many of the mangroves are being removed. Not really in Cuba. They really have a strong conservation agenda. And she modeled these across the entire coastline of Cuba. I missed that. Sorry.
Those communists.
Oh, yeah. Communism is a conservation strategy. And yeah, it's like I can go off on that. But, anyway, this is the protected area agency in Cuba, and we were able to train. Teresa was really instrumental in training them and how to use this model. We brought them data, and now they're using it on their own. And this is Steve Peterson. I don't have Steve Peterson from Plant Wildlife Science, but we took a trip around Western Cuba. There's Teresa. There's one of my TNC colleagues there. But we got to ride in this Peugeot, all 5 of us. Steve's bigger than I am. So I don't know why he got the back seat. and then Ryan Shields, he's another student that I think has done an exceptional job. He was my TA. He originally took my class. He did that African Parks project. And then I was also able to find him funding to do work in Dominica, detecting changes in seagrass and coral reef from Hurricane Maria. And he used satellite imagery to do that. And we were able to take trips to the Dominican Republic. How come you're not in here?
I don't know. Did you take the picture?
Yeah.
No.
Matt came with us. This was a TNC focused project where we actually worked with the Red Cross, the local Red Cross division, and we identified a community in the Dominican Republic on the North Shore that was having a lot of problems with flooding whenever storms came through. And we modeled this area and we said, well, if you replant mangroves and you restore your reef, you take out, you implement management actions to restore this reef. And if you plant more mangroves in this area, this is going to help reduce the impacts of flooding and help you adapt to climate change. And then finally, as I wrap this up, this is one of our long trips to the Dominican Republic, and we were in a really remote area trying to make it out to a beach, and we drove to this bridge, and then we looked at the bridge and said, well, I guess there was a hurricane that came through and washed out this bridge, and so we're not gonna go across. But fortunately, we were parked there wondering what we should do, and the ferry showed up. The ferry showed up, and we got a good kick out of this. It was like, you think he can take us across? But obviously he couldn't. So just like we were at the end of the road there, this is the end of my talk. So with that,
That's not where you backed into the tree, is it?
this is the same trip. I didn't want to show that. I didn't want to show that picture because I'm kind of ashamed of that. I actually did. Our big van, there was one lonely coconut tree on the beach, and we backed up and just completely shattered the back window.
We backed
Well,
up.
I did. I take full responsibility for that. So yeah, that's been my journey in this teaching experience, and yeah, I've really enjoyed working with the students, and giving them real world projects has really been it's been rewarding for me as well. So yeah.
Questions from the group here?
Yeah.
So I love this, and we don't do enough of it in political science, and it's sort of harder to do in some ways because it really helps to have a concrete skill, it sounds like, that you are applying.
Yeah.
Now, do the students already have this skill before they embark on this class at all, or are you teaching the skill as part of the class?
Well, they do have, I mean, these are mostly, in this class, they're mostly seniors, and they're mostly graduate students. And so they're learning how to take imagery and how to extract information from it to answer some question. But most of them already have GIS skills. They already have an introduction, but I am teaching them as we go. And so that is part of the process.
So they've got some basic foundational skills, and you are teaching a little bit more of the application and some of the finer grained details.
That's right. That's right. So the first part of the semester is mostly about teaching the software, and we give them labs and they experiment with it. The last half of the semester is all about this project. And actually we don't have a final. I want them focused on this project and delivering I have a midterm exam that tests them on all that information up until that point. And then after that, it's all about the final. And that's when they really apply. And we're having these check-in meetings, and we're finding out, sometimes on these teams, some really have good, excellent skills in what they're trying to do, and the other team member doesn't. And so they have to try to balance it out. And yeah, but it's definitely something where they're learning as they're going, but they do have a base that they're building on.
Yeah, this couldn't be a introductory.
No.
Well, yeah, so kind of my follow-up question is, what's the difference between this and just an internship, right? Where they actually work for the company. And it sounds like that you've emphasized the practical part of it, but it turns out that there is a abstract learning part of it as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think the next step would be an internship. This is something where this is one of the challenging parts. We have to rein in the project so it doesn't overwhelm them. You have to have a specific, so in this semester, we have one location, we have one research question, and they have to create a land cover for 2 dates for that project site. And with that land cover from date 1 and date 2, they can answer that research question. So that's the expectation. Now, the project leads can take it to a whole nother level and say, well, I want you to identify this and this and this and this. And we have to say, no, we can't do that. We can only do this. So the expectation has to be at the very beginning, really refined. So the students feel comfortable and we're able to do it. But this is a 3-credit class. We meet once a week, because with my regular job, that works best for me. And then we have these Zoom calls, and they're usually early in the morning because we're talking to Europe. And
So you're doing the Europe one this semester?
Yeah. So it's, I'm learning as I go, but it's been a fun ride.
So question. How would a full-time professor manage something like this? Sounds like you had an in because of your full-time job. But how to arrange all of this, get the connections?
Yeah, well, you have to, depending on, your emphasis and your subject, you have to think about who in my network needs an answer to a question. And then, I send out, a couple months before the semester begins, I send out a bunch of emails. I say, hey, I have this opportunity, and I see who bites. And so I'm just, you have to think about what the question is, if it's manageable with what you're teaching your students, and then just try to exploit that network of contacts. But you're right, I'm kind of I have a different background because, I work in conservation and I have this extensive network that I can draw on. So that can make it challenging, yeah.
You have a better network than we would with just our alumni. You'd have to develop the professional side.
Yeah, that is.
How big are the classes? How many students?
Usually they're usually less than 15. I usually have about 6 to 7 teams.
You mentioned like you pair them up, what have you done when you have one of the partners who just isn't pulling their weight?
I have 2 teams right now. I have one student dropped out completely. So I have one student, that's Keegan, that's totally doing it on his own. So that happens, and I have to consider that when I'm grading, and I end up actually helping him more. They're in the final
Helping
stretch
the
right
person who's pulling the load, or helping the person get enthused to do their part?
now. Both sides,
Okay.
both sides, yeah. And I'm checking in with the teams, and I can get a sense of who's really pulling their weight on these teams, and that's working in teams and that's part of real world.
It is.
That's what we're all going to experience. Yeah. I'm sorry.
Danny Dameron, I don't know if we've met.
No.
Assistant dean here in the college. I'm really interested in the way in which you use the experiential learning cycle, particularly the role of reflection in terms of a tool for student learning. Could you talk a little bit about that? How that piece, the literature says that without reflection, we actually don't learn.
Yeah.
But that's a different argument. But I'm curious, what are the challenges for you to integrate reflection into this process in a way that helps the student better articulate their own learning?
So from the student perspective or from my perspective?
Well, your role in helping them do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, because with the students, it's a mad dash to the end when they're going to be presenting these projects next Thursday. And this week, I take time off to really help them, and because they're all trying to get it done. And so I don't really know if there's much student reflection at the end because they take off. And but for me, I think about what has worked, what hasn't worked. I think back on the times with partners that have really been engaged and partners that haven't been engaged. This semester has been really fortunate because there's been really good engagement from the Europe side, and I have to push back and say, no, you can't do that. Other times with some of the partners, we're not getting much, and it's up to the students to come up with their own training data. So I have to think about, really think about who I'm gonna work with and what's manageable in terms of a project and a research question. And how can do I make the teams bigger? Do I keep them smaller? And I'm thinking of 2-person teams maybe a little bit too much. And I'm thinking of bringing it up to 3-person teams. And that'll be less time commitment for me. And maybe it'll be less overall load and we can take on a bigger scope of a research project when there's 3 of them together. And I'm thinking about, when I reflect, how can I better motivate them? How can I better prepare in the front end their skill set that they need to better accomplish their task and give them empowerment to be able to produce a better product. Those are kind of things I'm thinking about.
Do you think there are points in the project where what you just did was a practice of metacognition, reflecting on the learning experience itself in ways in which it could be improved. Inspiring learning would be the same for the student, right? Where the student would actually go through that kind of a process in terms of how they engage experience to learn. Are there places in the project process where you would say, ideally, this would be a great time for a student to ask the kinds of questions that you're asking yourself, so that they, as they move into their career, become project managers themselves? Are there, where would you say those would be for what you're doing?
Yeah, those inflection points. I need to think more about that because that's a good. I haven't really taken advantage of asking along the way, how can we improve this process? Asking the students. And I think that would be something that I could do in the future. Because we have these opportunities to talk with the project leads every 2 weeks, and those are set up, for the last 2 months. And that would be a good time to ask, but I also need to ask individually, because sometimes the students are more reserved and don't really want to share things, but maybe when I'm meeting with them one-on-one, that would be a good opportunity.
It seems like because of all of your experience, you would be just an incredible resource for your students in terms of unpacking the messiness, right? Because they're living it, but they also have that imperative of the product at the end. And perhaps the messiness that you're experiencing and know so well, calling it out, they could be advantaged by that.
Yeah, well, I hope so. And, in my class, I really try to drill this into their brains that, when you say what technique is the best, or what satellite to use is the best, or what, it's all about the research question. And that research question defines the decisions that you make. And so, when someone says, this technique is always going to be the best, or this, you get the highest resolution satellite imagery you can, because that's going to be the best, be wary, because it all comes down to the question that you're asking and choosing the resources and the tools you have to best answer that question. That's really what I wanted to learn out of this class.
Could you put up that slide again that showed the intention, integration, and reflection?
Yeah.
And you mentioned that you got this off the website.
Yeah, that's at the Office of Experiential Learning, and they're actually, I think they're hiring someone to lead that office for BYU.
They already have some there.
Dave Waddell is.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think, they have another job opening, maybe, I'm not
Oh, yeah,
sure.
maybe when I Googled it, I noticed that there was an opening. I thought, oh, that's cool. They're really investing in this.
Oh, yeah, they have, it's connected
Yeah.
with the
Yeah, so.
careers.
um,
So the reflections they're kind of talking about, so I think you've got the intention integration, and you have that going, and this reflection is kind of the discussion that Danny was asking
Yeah,
about there
but
too.
yeah, I need to, I think getting the student's perspective during the process is really important, and thinking about this more every year. And it seems to be getting better every year as I do it. And hopefully I don't run out of partners to work with. Yeah.
I do a project in a class. It's not nearly as involved. But one of the things I do is I call it thinking. And it's a weekly, they have to spend an hour a week with just paper and a pencil, no electronics, no napping, hopefully. And reflect on what they're learning. So I just say, it's your thinking time. And hopefully I tell them to think about what we're learning, but they can think about other things and ideas how to apply it to other things, to go beyond this class, because very rarely do they carry stuff from one class to another.
Yeah.
But it just, and it's just great. It's graded in the sense that if they do it, they get the credit for it. And I make it worth 10% of their grades, chunk of them. But it's, and they have to write something down, and then they turn it in. And I just check it to make sure that they've done it. Weekly, I have them, they want to do it all at the end. You know, and I say, no,
You have them do it weekly.
weekly.
Okay.
So it's 15 or 16
Yeah.
times.
Okay.
That's
Yeah,
great. You
that's
make
really-
them think.
Well, or sleep, one of the two. And there's no computers, no phones.
Yeah.
I'm afraid they sleep. That's what I do in my thinking time. But then I wake
No.
up with new ideas. So,
That's true. That does help.
but yeah,
1 o'clock in the morning
That's a great
usually.
idea.
it's just a way to get them to think about the process.
Yeah.
And I actually got that idea. One, you.
Oh.
So do the students go there?
No,
Okay, they never go there.
no,
They would love to.
we're going there virtually on Zoom.
So we take students on a study abroad program, about 5 weeks.
Mhm.
And I'm rethinking some of our assignments or what we have them do. So I've kind of got the opposite problem. We're there.
Mhm.
So now we gotta, anyway, just try to bring this home to what exactly.
Yeah.
So
I
then
mean-
want to get from this study abroad
I mean,
program.
you have to think about, what's the problem that you want them to solve?
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
And then let them choose. I think the power of choice
Yeah,
gives them more empowerment
yeah.
in terms, and more incentive, and they're more excited about it. At least that's been my experience.
Mhm.
But wherever you're going, is there a partner that you could work with, an organization, and do they have a question? They need help.
Well, we do lots of, it's the fashion and design.
Mhm.
And so they see design from so many different elements. I mean, we kind of
Yeah.
focus on the apparel industry as well as interior design, kind of those industries, interior design, the crafting industry. So they see it from so many different avenues.
Yeah,
I mean, but we have marketing students, we have art students, we get history students, family life students, apparel design and industrial design.
so
we
many
have-
research questions
Yeah,
there.
and there's so many different groups that come on this trip. So they're all looking at all of our appointments from a different angle.
Hmm.
And so I'm just thinking, I liked your ideas about letting them choose.
Yeah, I mean, the case-based, presenting a problem or a project-based.
And they do, a lot of them do the creative or research projects, but
Yeah.
anyway, just some good
Yeah.
ideas.
Yeah, Dan?
You alluded to the idea that you take students and you put them with a partner.
Yes.
Sometimes these partners aren't very responsive. Even though they're doing all this work, students are doing all the work for them.
Yeah.
How do you negotiate this lack of responsiveness? And then also student anxiety.
Yeah. I mean, that happens. I don't think I've been the best at shepherding those partners. I can tell the partners that really get along and they really work together, synergy, and other partners that struggle. So, I need help on how to navigate that. I try to talk to them one-on-one and find out, how is the project going? It's all about the project and the progression on the answering the research question and how I can help them. Sometimes it's lack of knowledge and a skill set, and then I team them up with another student who's really good. I said, can you guys work together? You know, I make myself available, and hopefully they can, you know, reach out to me and I can teach them and support them. But if you have any suggestions, yeah, I'm,
Actually, if I can scale that up a little bit further then. So you have students that are in partnerships working for clients. You also allude to the idea that the client sometimes is not as responsive as they should be to the
Yes.
students
yes,
when it comes for data, whatever the case is, even though students are doing the work for them.
yes.
How do you deal with that?
Get a new client,
I-
a new partner next
Well,
time.
Next time, but that doesn't help them here and now.
yeah, I mean, I have to put pressure on the client. I say, hey, you said you needed help doing this. These students are under tight timeline. We need you to, and usually there's, like with Rewilding Europe, there's a central person, a central GIS guy. He's in the Netherlands, Jelle is his name. And if I'm not getting responses from the site teams, I go to him and say, hey, put some pressure on him or her to give us what we need. And, you know, when we have the kickoff call at the very beginning, we all agree to the terms. And so I think that's one way that's made it better, is that we have that kickoff call from the beginning. We say, okay, this is what we're going to do. These are the expectations. This is the deadline. This is when there's a timeline of when we need certain things. We're counting on you. If you don't give us what we need, our product is going to suffer for you. So yeah, I think that's helped. And I think I've seen that less. So.
All right, well, let's give Steve another round of applause. Well, coming and look forward to more in the fall. So-
Thanks for the opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you were
So, Sandy, I
inspired.
had a member of my
You were inspired
department.
by this. I think I was. I have no idea. That's great. I just